Hello, in this video, I was going to sit there and talk a little bit about some basic CSS elements, mostly about how you should use absolute positioning. I see this being a confusion with a lot of different people and not understanding why their absolute position elements are not where they think they should be. So I'm going to start sharing my screen here and show an example of what we should be doing. So here I have a basic HTML page that is just loading my style sheet. And then I also have two DOM elements. One is called example parent, and the next one is called example free child. So free child is going to be something that the child of its parent that can be located within any X and Y coordinate. So what you have to think is you have a parent and you have an absolute positioned element. If you do not have a parent that is set to a certain position of relative or another absolute positioned element with a parent that has to be a relative position, that you will end up having an X and Y coordinate of your document. So in order to demonstrate what I'm talking about here, let's look at the CSS. So I just have a basic body here that's just setting a background color so we can just see what's going on. But we see our example parent. So here's our parent, here's our free child. So our parent is positioned relative. This is very important that anytime you have an absolute positioned element, you should always have its parent or some parent somewhere in the hierarchy of a position set to relative. And if you do not, I will show you what happens if you do not have a parent that is set to relative. So we just have a regular background color of red. I set the width and height of my parent to 500 pixels. And then we have the free child that is positioned absolute, and then we just have the text of the color of white. And then I just have just a yellow border, the groove on it, just to give it a little bit more definition to see what's going on here. So by default, an absolute positioned left, right, bottom, all that stuff is set to 0. So if we go in there and we set, like, say we want it to be a top of 0, so X and Y coordinate, top of 0, left of 0, if we save this, you'll see that nothing has changed because that is pretty much the default. But if you want this to be centered, you go top left, right 0, and bottom 0, and then it will be taking up the full 100% width of its whole parent container. But that's not what we really want to be talking about right now, but you can see that for an example. So if we go back to top left 0, so say we wanted this to be kind of, say, you know, a little bit down and a little bit to the left. So we want to move it down and we want to move it over a tiny bit. So if we want to do that, we need to do something like, say we move it 50 pixels down and then also say 100 pixels from the left. So you can see that that has moved it within the X and Y coordinate of 50 pixels down, 100 pixels left. And if you end up doing something like, if you're using M's, so then you could also use 1M and then 3M. If we end up doing that, then you're using M positioning, which is the same thing. That you can end up doing that instead of pixels, depending on how you're setting up your CSS. But, so say we have this set. We'll go back to pixels, so this might make a little bit more sense to some people. So 50 and 100. So this gives us a position in this area. Well, it's positioned within this container, this red box, because the parent is set to relative. So let's take this relative off and let's say, and I see this happen a lot, and that's why we're having this conversation, that if we take that off, now the X and Y coordinate of your free child is based upon the document. So it's 50 pixels down from the top of your document and 100 pixels over to the left. So if we change this, the CSS, to just 0 top and 0 left, you'll see it should end up in the top left side of our body. So now you can see it's all the way up there. Well, hey, example free child is a child of my main class example parent. Well, why is it all the way up there? It should be 50 pixels, you know, 0, 0, and it should be right inside of my top left part of my red box. Well, that's because you didn't set a position of relative. So you must set a position of relative in order to reset the X and Y coordinate of your absolute positioned element. So I hope that helped out some people and get this right moving forward. Thanks.